are now shifting topics. We are going to look at libraries in the state of Vermont. And I apologize, as we are, I thought we had already had the bill sponsor and a walkthrough on this. And thankfully, Ms. Lowell, our great committee assistant, indicated that we had not. So we are starting to think about building a miscellaneous education bill. This might be one of the things we put in it, or we might have it go as a standalone. And with that, I want to welcome, I believe Senator Hardy, the bill sponsor, is here. And Mr. Anderson, good to see you as well, Ledge Counsel. And so we're going to have Senator Hardy give us an understanding of why she put this bill in, and then we'll move to Mr. Anderson for an overview. And then we have a number of different witnesses. And for those of you who may have tracked this committee's work last year, I believe Senator Perchlik is our committee historian. It passed out of this committee, and unfortunately, because of COVID, didn't make it anywhere else along the way. So with that, Senator Hardy, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for having me here to the Education Committee. Just one note, the bill passed out of the Education Committee and passed the full Senate as well, and moved over to the House, but then got caught up in the COVID crisis. So thanks for having me. I love libraries, and Senator Perchlik can remember my enthusiasm about libraries. And so as soon as I was on the Education Committee and got my bearings, I immediately started thinking about doing a bill on libraries. And then our wonderful state librarian, Mr. Jason Broughton, came to committee, and I started working with him on putting together this bill along with the chair of the library board, Bruce Post, who I also see on the screen, as well as a lot of local librarians around the state, talking about how we could do a full sort of analysis and assessment of the status of libraries in Vermont, how they provide services, who they serve, what kinds of resources they have in terms of books and technology and other items that may be in the library, and how they participate in and add to our communities around the state. Nearly every little town, or most little towns, have a library, as well as our big cities and bigger towns, big cities and bigger towns. So it's a real statewide resource. And also our colleges and our universities and our schools, most of those have libraries as well. So this bill would take a comprehensive look at libraries throughout the state. And it would create a working group that would make a report on the status of libraries in Vermont. The working group would be chaired by the state librarian and include members from the Library Association, the executive director of the Vermont Humanities Council, which also has some work related to libraries, representatives of public libraries from different kinds of public libraries, school libraries from different sizes.
Senator Hardy, Senator, sorry to interrupt. Sure. Anything you could just, I mean, Ledge Counsel will bring us through.
Oh, okay.
We want them to, will give us the big dig, but you know, while you put this, are you afraid libraries are closing? Are you hoping libraries will close? Are you, you know, what sorts of things got you to put this bill in? That's what we would love.
Okay, got it. And Tucker will take care of the details. All right, so the reason I put together this bill is so that we could have a comprehensive assessment of where we are with libraries. I don't want libraries to close. I think they're an incredibly valuable resource to our communities, and they need more support, and they need more connections with each other in order to really be able to provide the types of services in the 21st century that our towns need. So this bill passed last year. There are a couple differences in this bill compared to the last year, and I'm just going to highlight those because, as with everything, libraries have been impacted by COVID, and so this does include some provisions to address how libraries have been impacted by COVID. As many of you know, they have been a huge source of providing access to the internet and access to technology and to information for our communities. And so it's really important that they be able to talk about how they've been impacted. It also would change some dates about reporting data to make sure that the data isn't skewed by the fact that most people aren't actually physically going to libraries right now during COVID. So Mr. Broughton can explain that, and it would push out the time for the report. There are some sections at the end of the bill that don't have to do with the actual library study. And those were, I put in there at the request actually of some House members and the administration. This was part of a miscellaneous library bill that was passed by the House last year. Mr. Broughton can certainly speak to this, but I believe those provisions are no longer necessary. And so I think that starts in section 2, and Tucker can take you through that. So just a heads up that those provisions in the bill are probably not needed anymore. But I would really love for this bill to pass. I would request, for whatever it's worth, that it go ahead as a standalone bill, mainly because there have been challenges with getting miscellaneous education bills passed over the last several years. And I would hate to see this get held up. I think this bill has broad support. I don't know anybody who doesn't love libraries. It's definitely a nonpartisan, everybody cheers for this kind of thing. So I'd really love to make sure it goes forward. So thank you so much. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for Senator Hardy? We, of course, can't promise its path. This committee, I have a feeling, is going to have a lot of luck with miscellaneous education bills. So any immediate questions or any pressing questions for Senator Hardy? Okay, thank you for coming down. Appreciate it. Mr. Anderson, how are you?
I am fantastic, Mr.
Good.
Chair.
Good.
And good afternoon, everyone. Tucker Anderson with the Office of Legislative Counsel.
Great.
Shall I dive right into the overview?
That would be terrific. Thank you.
Thank you. We will start with section 1 under the first reader assistance heading, dealing with the establishment and duties of the working group on the status of libraries in Vermont. Subsection A creates the working group and then has a brief statement of intent around the creation of the working group. So within this proposed session law, it states that the intent is to strengthen and support libraries of all sizes and improve library services for the public. Subsection B deals with the membership of this particular working group, and there are 11 members. Senator Hardy had started diving into the membership specifically, but the members are the state librarian, the president of the Vermont Library Association, the executive director of the Vermont Humanities Council, 3 representatives of public libraries who are from libraries of different sizes and throughout the state, 2 representatives of public school libraries, again, from libraries of different sizes and throughout the state, 2 representatives of college and university libraries, 1 public library trustee, be appointed by the president of the Friends and Trustees section of the Vermont Library Association. That comprises the entire working group. Moving on to subsection C, we'll take a look at the powers and duties of the working group. What I will do for you is give you a high-level overview. This is a very comprehensive section. The language gets into a great deal of detail around the duties of the group, but there are shalls and mays. So I'll focus on what is mandatory and what is optional and allow you to ask questions if there's anything specific within this comprehensive language that you need. So first, the shalls. The working group shall study library services for specific segments of the Vermont population. That's in subdivision C1. In C2, they shall study the role that libraries play in emergency preparedness, cultural diversity and inclusion, public health and safety, community identity and resiliency, economic development, and access to public programs and services. Subdivision 3 is new. The group shall study the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on library operations and services. And then 4, the mandatory piece here in 4 is a general study of the overall status of libraries, including information related to programming, collections, facilities, technology, and staffing. The subdivisions that follow that, which are A through E, get into more granular detail about what may be studied under each of those categories: programming, collections, facilities, technology, and staffing. I'll touch upon a few of them. If you want greater detail, happy to go into any of it. Under the category of programming, the working group may study things such as attendance at the library programs, whether programs are meeting community needs. There may be an assessment of public engagement and outreach surrounding programs. Under the category of collections, they may study the size and diversity of library collections, including any historical materials. Moving on to page 4, the category of facilities. They may study whether the library facilities and buildings could be improved with regard to, for example, energy efficiency, accessibility, flexibility, meaning the ability to move around components of those facilities. Technology, subdivision D. They can study whether the Vermont libraries have sufficient access to technological resources, cybersecurity, etc. Under staff, subdivision E, the group may study staffing levels at Vermont libraries and whether staffing is sufficient to meet community needs. I'll move on to subsection D, which deals with mandatory and discretionary solicitation of public input. So first, the working group shall solicit feedback from the general public and the library users around the state. The discretionary authority, the working group may examine models for library management and organization in other states, including the formation of statewide service networks. This is something that the committee last biennium took a look at and decided should be a discretionary study if there is time. Subsection E, starting on page 5, line 1, is new. And this is the piece that Senator Hardy mentioned around data collected related to the COVID-19 pandemic. So it states that the data used in any of these analyses may be from prior to the pandemic. Again, recognizing that there may have been a shift in the demand on libraries because of the COVID-19 response. Additionally, they may also use data from the post-pandemic era. This is all discretionary. There's no mandate around the data that has to be used. It does recognize that data can be used for different purposes, different temporal ranges, depending on what they're studying, such as use of physical space within the libraries. Subsection F gives the group discretionary authority to solicit feedback from the Board of Libraries. Subsection G allows the working group, states that the working group shall have administrative, technical, and legal assistance from the Department of Libraries. Under subsection H, we get into the reporting duties of the working group. The deadline for the final report is on or before November 1st, 2023. The group shall submit a report to the education committees in the House and Senate, and it shall contain specific and detailed findings and proposals concerning the issues set forth in subsection C. So this relates back to all of those mandatory pieces that we talked about before we got into the more granular details. Further, they shall submit recommendations for updating the statutes, rules, standards, and governance structures of Vermont libraries to ensure equitable access for Vermont residents, efficient use of resources, and quality in the provision of services. Recommendations shall also be submitted related to the funding needs of Vermont libraries. They may also submit any other information or recommendations that they deem necessary as part of their report and recommendation to the General Assembly. Subsection I deals with meetings and, in some sense, procedures around the meetings of the working group. First, the state librarian shall be the chair of the working group. For some of the working groups and task forces that you may have seen in the past, this is often an elected position by the body, by the committee itself. Here it is stated that the state librarian shall be the chair, and that the chair shall call the first meeting of the group to occur within 45 days after the effective date of the act. A quorum of this working group is a majority of the membership. And finally, the working group shall cease to exist on December 1st, 2023. That's 1 month after the date that the report is due. Under subsection J, we get into the compensation and reimbursement of the members. Members of the working group are entitled to per diem compensation and reimbursement under 32 VSA section 1010. That is the section that details how compensation and reimbursement are applied to all of the boards and committees of the state. They may be compensated for not more than 12 meetings. The payments shall be made from monies appropriated to the Department of Libraries, and that appropriation is made in subsection K. The sum of $4,000 is appropriated to the department from the general fund in fiscal year 2022 for compensation and reimbursement. Senator Hardy briefly mentioned this. We've hit the next reader assistance heading, which deals with technical corrections concerning the Department of Libraries. This morning, House Government Operations went through a committee bill, walked through that. It was just a very exciting morning for everyone to hear my monotone for so long. And many of the sections and repeals that you're dealing with here are included in that committee bill. However, that committee bill is more comprehensive in the cleanup it does. It includes a much more repeal of outdated and inapplicable statutes. And you may want to either decide to take this section out or harmonize it with the work that House Government Operations is doing so that we don't inadvertently put back in statutes that have been otherwise changed or repealed in their bill. Would you like a walkthrough of this piece of the bill?
Sure. Why don't you give us a quick overview of it?
Section 2 repeals a subsection in an interesting statute that deals with the specific locations of certain offices within the state. And the subsection that's being repealed states that the principal office of the Division for Historic Preservation and the Board of Libraries shall be in Montpelier. And it is my understanding that that is not the case and has not been the case for a little while. Section 3, another interesting section. Under current law in this section, any copy of a statute, law, or decision of another state that is kept in the state library can be used as prima facie evidence in court. And the proposal here in Section 3 is to eliminate the reference to the state library in Montpelier. That's a technical correction. The House has taken a closer look at this, House GovOps, and decided that that clause should likely be stricken in its entirety. Section 4 allows the Secretary of Education, when arranging conferences and summer schools for superintendents and teachers, to cooperate with the Board of Libraries in the addition here, or the state librarian in that preparation. Sections 5 and 6 deal with a little bit of cleanup around the printing, distribution, and maintenance of certain documents and records. And these are two pieces of a larger cleanup that is happening. First, in Section 5, references to state documents and documents relating to other states and local governments is eliminated from a section that requires that the Department of Libraries provide, administer, and maintain those collections and store them in other depositories throughout the state. Section 6 deals with bids relating to printing services that are arranged by Buildings and General Services. And I'm sure that some of the folks that are in the room with you now, the virtual room with you now, can provide more context, but it is my understanding that these services are no longer provided by BGS. So this is a cleanup eliminating statutory references to processes around printing that no longer exist. There are a few repeals at the end, again, dealing with statutes that relate to printing and distribution requirements that are no longer in practice. And that is all.
Yeah, so did this, I'm just curious, some of these repeals and in general cleanup, this came from the committee's work last year as they were taking testimony, is that accurate? Or was this was included in last year's bill that passed? Or in the very first version?
The particular provisions that you have in front of you came from a bill that passed the House but was not taken up in the Senate.
Okay.
And then the working group pieces came out of this committee last year.
Okay. Committee, I'm wondering what everybody's, I guess I could, am I using it correctly? I'm looking to know what everybody's prima facie is of the bill. First impression, it's a library joke. I've been working on it since I Googled it. Pretty good, Mr. Anderson?
I do appreciate it. I have tried to stop laughing at puns so that there's no recordings of my unprofessional punnery.
Committee, Senator Perchlik.
Yeah, I mean, because we passed it out last year. I don't have any problem with the first section. The second section we didn't deal with last year.
Right.
As Mr. Anderson just said, it came from the House. But I do have, just to refresh my memory and maybe of others, maybe Mr. Anderson could tell us who the Board of Libraries is.
Ooh. I think that you actually have a representative from the Board of Libraries in the room who may be able to very eloquently describe what the Board of Libraries is and their remaining duties under statute.
Here I am. Hi, for the record, I'm Bruce Post. I'm from Essex, and I am chair of the State Board of Libraries, which has been in existence for a while. First of all, under many different kinds of personalities. At one time, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court was the chair of the Board of Libraries because it had so much authority over the state law library in Montpelier. Times have changed. At present, the Board of Libraries has two functions. First, it advises the state librarian. Advises. We can't tell him or her what to do, but we provide advice. And in my tenure on the board, we've had some pretty good interactions and have provided some decent advice, I believe. The second responsibility we have is we are the, essentially for Vermont, the Board of Geographic Naming. And we name geographic features. We used to also name transportation features. Thankfully, that was shifted to the Board of Transportation. I'm glad we don't deal with it. At one point, the board dealt with naming a rotary somewhere. So that's...
Mr. Post, let me just interrupt you for a second. So you're still responsible for naming geographic features in the state?
Yes.
So if, for example, I wanted something named for Senator Terenzini, I would go to you and say, and make my case, a geographic feature?
Is she deceased? She would need to be deceased. I just have to jump in. She must be deceased. This is the state librarian, or she, yes.
He, in this case, 5 years. We have a rule that we wait 5 years after someone has been deceased. And I think the reason for that is that we allow the period of fond appreciation to cool a little bit so that there's not a rush to name something. So that's a policy we do. And I think that tracks with the federal statute, the federal practice as well through the U.S. Geological Survey.
Okay, thank you for that. I didn't know that. That's very helpful. So let's see, Senator Lyons, you want to jump in and then we'll move to hear testimony? Go ahead.
I have a question about section 3. Section 3, 2. Or no, it's section 5, sorry, number 2 on page 8. So I just a question of interest. And what is the relationship then between the collection and the storage of documents? What's the relationship with the state archivist and the state archives? Is this under the jurisdiction of the state libraries? How does it intersect with what Tanya Marshall does? Given that I'm looking here at federal and state documents, or is this just an additional something that the libraries can do?
Mr. Anderson.
So I would again defer to an expert in the room who raised their hand. I think it's from the Department of Libraries. But it is my understanding that this section deals with direct reflection of federal law, past federal law, relating to libraries that act as federal depositories. And that is as far as my historical knowledge about this section goes.
If the chair would be so kind, I'd like to, as your state librarian, have the expert, Tom McMurdo, who oversees this area of our capacity, discuss this briefly. We are in concert with archives, but it will be explained shortly on how that works.
Great. Mr. McMurdo, please.
Yes. So briefly, we are a federal depository library. We're part of the Federal Depository Library Program, which is the federal government's way of disseminating government documents. We are one of the oldest federal depository libraries in the country, dating back, I believe, to 1848. So we've been doing this for a long time. I believe relating to the question is essentially what happens to these documents. We keep federal documents. The archives, under their statutes that were created in, I believe, in 2008, 9, and 10, Tucker, you can correct me if I'm wrong there, but I believe that those statutes direct state documents to be stored at archives. So as far as those materials are concerned, state documents are in the vault at archives. We do retain a historical law collection at the Department of Libraries. We have a pretty comprehensive legislative history collection. So these materials are stored and are kept. So it's not a question of losing anything. It's just a matter, I think, to your point, Senator Lyons, of where these materials are, who's looking after them, and what their disposition is. Does that answer the question? Great.
Great. Thank you. Other questions on the contents as walked through by Mr. Tucker before we begin taking testimony? Okay, very good. Seeing none, we will start. Is it, Jason, do I pronounce your last name Broughton?
It can be.
What is the proper pronunciation?
Broughton.
Broughton. All right, Mr. Broughton, glad you're with us today. I know you played a role likely last year in the construction of this bill, and glad you're here to weigh in. So with that, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for having me. One of the more important parts about this bill for us as a department is we would like to take a baseline of our libraries and how we interact with them because I've had a lot of senators and representatives statewide ask me, well, how is our library doing? And in some capacity, we can tell you that, but we cannot, for the record, tell you what is a baseline level of service for public libraries in the state of Vermont. Each of them are all different. So this will create a gauge to say what is applicable, what's affordable, what is not, where we are seeing gaps, and also at the same time, because there's a lot of conversation, for example, around technology and broadband, we are also waiting in anticipation of what the state and the federal government will do on that topic, because that also impacts a lot of libraries across the state. For example, over the summer, we worked with the Department of Public Safety, and we helped a lot of libraries to turn on their Wi-Fi for 24 hours a day. You have hopefully heard that a lot of people in your community are using the library at all times of day, sitting in their cars now to access services. And it took a lot of methodical work, but it was something that the libraries wanted to do. But in some cases, not all libraries, believe it or not, have good Wi-Fi. And for those that do, sometimes it's not as reliable. So we would like to know that and just make it available. Down the line, this report would serve as a wonderful way for us to review where Vermont libraries are at, public libraries per se, and interactions with school libraries and academia, and use that to begin to examine the statutes. One of the things that I know that we celebrate in Vermont is that we are uniquely, I would say, up to date on things. Well, when it comes to our library standards and statutes, some of them are 40 years old and outmoded and outdated. So we aren't even able to collect data because on record, some of those actually need to be updated. So this study is a nice way for us to not have to guess. It's going to give us a flashlight in the dark right now, because the Department of Library does not oversee any library in the state, but we do assist, administer, consult, collaborate, and sometimes cajole, if I'm upfront, into how can we work together to do a variety of things. At the current moment, I would say they appear to appreciate me. I wouldn't say like, but they do listen to me. And so right now we have a sentiment that yes, this is something that we want to do just to see how services across Vermont are doing. With that, the State Board of Library Chair, Bruce Post, could also add from his perspective, because he was here before I, not saying that he's older, but he also has some interesting information that he can relay about the importance of a bill such as this through his experience as a board chair.
Terrific. That's very helpful. Any questions, committee, before we move on to, I think it makes sense perhaps that we will switch around a little bit. Senator Hooker.
Just a quick one, Mr. Broughton. How many libraries are there in the state? And do libraries have to register with the state?
No, they do not have to. Well, let me back up. It depends on the type of library. There are some libraries that have to register with the Secretary of State because they're a 501c3. Mm-hmm. Herein lies the wonderful part of Vermont where we have different types of libraries: free, public, nonprofit, definitely a whole range. And they each have different parameters of how they have to operate, if they have a specific type of board or what the state requirements are. We have been keeping records since our inception of the libraries, but they don't necessarily have to register with us. But because of the way we distribute our funding, state and federal, it makes it very helpful if they do. So in a sense, we kind of capture it, but we have, at last count, and Tom, you can correct me, I think 186 libraries. We're down from 196.
And are these the libraries that are, quote, registered with the state? And would this bill only apply to those libraries?
No, it would apply to all the public libraries. We are asking to understand where the libraries are at, what types we have, who has gone away since inception, who's remaining, and how are they doing?
I know the smallest one in Danville is there.
That's true. That is true. Tom, would you like to add something really quick? Because he also works with our state library data coordinator. So he also knows some of the stats really quickly on our libraries.
Yes, if I may just briefly add a comment.
Absolutely.
Great. Yes, right now there's 185 public libraries, maybe 186. There's a library possibly being formed in Marlborough.
Yes.
According to statute, to be a public library, you have to get at least $1 of tax money from your town. So it's a little bit flexible. You can have essentially a private library that gets $1 from the town. So, if you're a public library, you have to offer services to the public. So we do feel, yeah, there's approximately 185 public libraries in the state. With all libraries, we were just discussing this number earlier. I believe there's just over 320 school libraries and 18 academics, I think. So, but this bill applies only to those 185 roughly public libraries.
Okay. Any other questions? I just have one before we move on to Mr. Post, and that is, what's the most unusual library that we have in Vermont? Do we have a library that is kind of unique, or are they all kind of a little bit, not cookie cutter, but their collection is not.
Yes, I can give you. It depends.
And I mean that in a good way, or unique.
No. Yeah, I know what you're saying. Here's what I can give you. It will depend on the lens you're viewing it. And to me, the most unique library that you probably have in Vermont, a lot of people would say, yes, it's in this number, would be the St. Johnsbury Athenaeum. It's probably the most unique. But if you look through another lens, your most furthest library out in the state from everybody else is Canaan, and they came online with our services. So way up there near Canada even. And I visited those wonderful people. They actually invited me, sadly, last year to come to the North Country Moose Festival, and I was not able to go because of COVID. So I look forward to going in 2022 to the North Country Moose Festival. You also have physical libraries that are kind of distinct. You also have Carnegie libraries in the state. You have the oldest one, the Thetford Library in the Federation. So it all depends on the lens that you want to see, including the smallest libraries, the largest libraries. But I would say the St. Johnsbury Athenaeum is the most unique because it's a museum, an art gallery, a library, a collection study. But then again, let me talk about libraries is not what you want to hear all day, because I just love to talk about the things in libraries.
No,
it's a deadly thing.
No, we're glad you do. That's why we have you in that position. Mr. Post, your impressions of the bill, please.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Senator Hardy for being so visionary about this. When I joined the board in 2011, we would get an annual report from the state librarian full of statistics of various kinds. And it reminds me of the line of the Ancient Mariner, water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink. We had all sorts of numbers, but never could tell a real story. And I think this bill comes along at a wonderful time, because we will take a comprehensive, the committee will take a comprehensive look at Vermont libraries, capacities. Staffing, is very important. Someone with a master's in library science, I think, is a rare creature here in Vermont. Many of the libraries can't afford them, or they can't keep them. What is the state of volunteers? So I believe that if you're going to make decisions, you should have up-to-date information. And I agree with Jason. The library standards have to be overhauled. It's long overdue. But also, when we talk about standards, we don't force libraries necessarily to do things. Remember, this is a grassroots library state. Different states have different arrangements. Ohio, I think, has a county system. The same thing may happen in Colorado and things like that. So we want to recognize this local control, local talent, local affection aspect of our libraries, and accumulate that knowledge so folks can make decisions. That includes the legislature. That might include select boards. It might include other state agencies. So obviously I support it. I just have 1 year left on my career on the State Library Board, and I hope to see this thing start before I leave. Thank you.
Terrific. Well, we will certainly aim toward that as well. Committee, questions for Mr. Post? Okay. Yes, please, Senator Terenzini.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to add just, I would echo what Senator Hardy said earlier. Who doesn't love a library? And if you like a good old-fashioned library controversy, Senator Hooker and I would love to invite you to Rutland right now to see the division between two parties on whether our library should relocate or not. So that's front page news often. So stay tuned.
Yes,
I,
Senator
I
Hooker.
would just like to add to that, because this building that our library is housed in was built in 1835 or whatever. And I have to say, Mr. Broughton, that it may be one of the more unique ones, since we have a cell in the basement of the building. It used to be a courthouse, and there's a holding cell there. And booksellers, the book sale sellers, of which I am a part, we call ourselves the sellers. And we have a sort of shadow library down there with stacks and books categorized. And it's just a wonderful place. So I don't know how I feel about the idea of moving this library.
I would like to ask a question if the chair so
Please.
approves. When you have people who have overdue fines, do you put them in the cell underneath the library?
We haven't lately, but I bet it happened in the past.
I like it. Terrific. Next up, let's go back to the top here. Janet Schaefer. Jeanette Schaffer?
Yes, Jeanette Schaefer, Assistant
Yes,
State
perfect.
Librarian for Library Advancement. Thank you.
Thank you. So please tell me your impression, or please tell us your impressions of the bill and any comments that you might have.
Yeah, I concur with our state librarian. We don't really have a baseline of information of libraries because everybody's independent. Everybody gets to really run their libraries as they deem appropriate, of course, along with their boards and municipalities, if they are a municipal library. And we, in order to even figure out how we can best serve them, this bill would be appropriate. And I also concur with Senator Hardy, who thought it was important to help libraries figure out how to connect with each other and to connect and collaborate also with their service needs. So a lot of them, because they're doing everything on their own and independently, they don't have a lot of purchasing power. They don't have a lot of the professional services that entities need, such as legal help, human resources support, and those kinds of supports that an organization needs. And if we knew how we could best serve them by having a good assessment of the landscape, then we could help them also connect to each other and figure out how to help them collaborate with each other on getting services like professional services. So I am in favor of this and would welcome it passing. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Any questions for Ms. Schaefer? Please, Senator Lyons.
I'm not sure it's only for Ms. Schaefer, but as I'm looking at the list of folks who are testifying and you began your testimony, we're talking about a Department of Libraries, and I'll plead my ignorance. Are you located where? Or where are you located in state government? Are you a separate entity? Are you in an agency, the Agency of Administration? That would just maybe a bit about how the organization itself, how you're organized.
If the chair so approves, I'd like to answer that as a state librarian.
Sure, absolutely.
All right, well, Senator Lyons, we were in Montpelier for over 100-something years, right next to the Supreme Court building. We reside under the Agency of Administration. And some people might say, well, you're a very small department. How did that come to be? But one must also remember the beginning of the library system with the department meant at a certain point, people saw it as the Department of Libraries kind of oversaw all of the independent libraries in the past. And that provided us, I guess, that connection that we agreed to come into in 1968 under the Aegis administration. At that time, though, we had regional hubs, we had over 100 employees, and you had over 196 libraries. So we were considered a very big powerhouse as a department. Now, the regionals are gone. Our last ended about 3 years ago. We have moved out of Montpelier, and we now reside in Barre with the Vermont Historical Society. We have renovated the remaining half of the old Spalding High School, to which the governor attended. He did let me know that he was in the principal's office quite a lot, he said. I was kind of shocked that he showed us where that was and used to be. But along with that, we have a really happy relationship with where we are at in the new building. We still, however, even though the physical presence of what I would call the hub and spoke, where we would be central and the regionals were out in their own buildings, the buildings are gone, but we still do things by county and by region by way of consultants. So we still have outreach across the land to all of our libraries in different capacities.
You know, as you're speaking, and I'm thinking about this structure that you've been talking about, it seems to me that libraries are really not only protective of our history and understanding our history, but also of the First Amendment and how important the work that you do in protecting our communications and written word, written now, recorded and everything else word. But is there anything in your mission, the charge, the statutory vision for libraries that speaks to your role in protecting First Amendment rights?
I would say yes to this. One of our cornerstones that might not be in the mission, I'm going to pull that up in just a second if I can, but just go navigate through it. We as a library, no matter what type we are, we have a few things that we have, as I call, of being in the club. One of our biggest things is going to be intellectual freedom. So all libraries believe in that. Freedom to read. That's going to be unique. Of course, if we had someone come in and say, could you please help me find the anarchist dictionary? We're not going to really ask, but we might say, that's interesting within that. But we also work to make sure that we are considered a safe space. But when we say that, we need to understand also that safe spaces do not mean disagreement will not occur. It means it's a safe place to have civil and sometimes uncivil discourse. You are allowed, in a sense, to have that discussion. So you will find a lot of people, usually when they want to create a conversation with the community, they will almost have it. And it's wonderful in New England that you have this too. Town halls, if they have them, and if they're full or booked, they immediately go to the library because they know you can have an argument amongst people and people will be able to walk away and say, well, I understand, as opposed to a fight. So we do have it as our mission as a library, no matter what, to make sure that we are democratizing people to much more access and information as possible as we can.
Thank you.
Terrific testimony. Thank you. Senator Chittenden.
So future speakers might be touching upon this, and maybe Dean Geffert, but I know at the university level, we have shared resources. So interlibrary loans are quite common. I'm curious, is there a lot of interloan libraries of collections between the Vermont state libraries, or is that something that this bill might foster through a better directory and inventory of our libraries in the state?
This is wonderful research. I will let Tom McMurdo go into this area, and I am sure the Dean of Libraries at UVM would also want to weigh in on this. But I will say, interlibrary loan has definitely transformed access and information to a lot of these communities, because when you can't find it in your library, you're able to access it somewhere else, including out of state, and if needed, internationally by a network that we all kind of join if you can afford it. But I will let Tom McMurdo discuss the uniqueness, because he oversees our interlibrary loan program and the uniqueness of it, along with the university systems and public libraries and school libraries and a few museums.
Mr. McMurdo, please, your thoughts on that as well as the bill in general.
Yes, thank you. So to cover the interlibrary loan question, this the structure of this bill will not directly affect our work doing interlibrary loan. Interlibrary loan is one of our main charges at the Department of Libraries. So we oversee the technological system that allows that to happen between libraries. That free flow of information is very much an important piece of the work that we do. So our goal is to make sure that if you walk into a library in Lowell or in Burlington at the Fletcher Free Library, that you have access to essentially the world's resources, which we can provide through interlibrary loan. We can find those resources online and deliver them. So there's a lot of different ways that we are helping with information in the state of Vermont. And that's everything from assisting people with business information. Sometimes that competitive information is information we can get for them that they can't get themselves. We also provide space in libraries for meetings, various other sort of hoteling. Think of that as certainly a value pre and post COVID, right? But Mr. Chair, to address your question about the bill, I have several thoughts about it. I concur certainly with everything that Jeanette, Jason, and Bruce have said so far. I would just add a couple things, which are the obvious question, which is, why do we need a study bill if we're the Department of Libraries? Well, right, shouldn't we know our business, right? That's a great question. Well, we do. We interact with all of these libraries, over 500 in the state, with some regularity with all of them, some more than others, obviously. But the great thing about this study is it will give us a way to kind of pull in and organize that information, to hear it directly from those people at those libraries, and also the public perception of those libraries and the information as we get it. So it's going to do a number of good things for us. The collection of that data can help us drive our services to better meet those needs in a more targeted way, so we can put our resources to better use in the future. And of course, in libraries, we're all about being data driven. Those collection decisions are about, has this book been checked out in 5 years? Well, it's time to go if it hasn't. Also, other services that we offer are the programs that we're offering having impacts. And so this study will kind of fill in some of that back end, that while we do try to collect that data, it will be in a serially organized way that can help us have data that will drive our services for hopefully many years to come. I would also add that, as Jason mentioned, that the gathering of this information will assist us in designing new standards. Our last standards that were actually passed by the legislature are from 1986. So that's pre-computer almost. I mean, some of us remember having a TRS-80 or an Apple II from way back when, and those big floppy disks, but we're a long way from there now. So a lot has happened since then. So that's going to help us be able to create those new standards. This bill will directly dovetail into that process for us, that we would pick that up following that. So I believe that's an added benefit to that. One comment I might add, and Jason could tell me to retract if necessary, but in the makeup of the committee, I would love to see the 2 assistant state librarians added to that group, because we're going to be at all the meetings anyway. So it might be nice for us to have the ability to interact a little more directly with the committee, since we're going to be such a big part of that. And then finally, libraries in many places are the de facto town center. We saw that during Irene, where a lot of emergency services were coordinated out of the library. This study will give us the ability to kind of gauge where we are in terms of the value of those libraries in those communities, get a little more feedback about that. We do know that they are vitally important to many towns in Vermont, but kind of helping to give people a voice as well in terms of being able to talk to the state. And I think that's important. I think that most of our libraries do feel comfortable talking to us, but giving them the chance to have an official voice and to be recognized in this way would be very useful for us. So thank you for letting me outline those thoughts.
Pleasure, and thanks for being here. Any questions before we turn to Professor Geffert? Wonderful. Professor, you're going to surprise us and tell us you're against the bill? Or
Resolutely opposed, yes.
right. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Looking forward to hearing your thoughts on it as well.
Yes, and thank you for having me. I think it's a great bill, and I think a study of this sort is all for the good. I'm really happy to be part of a state that's undertaking something like this. I did have a few thoughts. I'll preface them by saying that I really defer for the majority of thoughts to Mr. McMurdo and Mr. Broughton and Ms. Schaefer, who are far more plugged into the state library system than I am. So I'm speaking a bit from the periphery. But a couple of thoughts. One is that recognizing that I do speak from the periphery, I hope that this group can ask hard questions about whether academic libraries ought to be on the periphery as they are now. It seems to me that the University of Vermont, as the state's flagship institution and as a land-grant institution, has a fundamental obligation to serve the state, and that the university's library has a fundamental obligation to serve the library community. And so in observing that we are on the periphery, I hope that one of the questions that this committee can take on is there more that the state can ask of the university and its library? And is there more that we can contribute to the state? So that's one thing. The second observation is this bill is asking the committee to answer a number of really good questions. It seems to me that there's one big question that I couldn't quite locate in the bill, and I was trying to figure out how to put this, and I think it's this. Do libraries in the state of Vermont provide access to the sorts of literature, scholarship, research that's necessary for an informed citizenry to be engaged and productive? Now, that's a really hard thing to measure. That's a question that's more easily asked than it is answered. But it seems to me that it's a question worth asking in this process. And you can think about this question in all kinds of different ways. If I'm sitting in my kitchen in Rutland and hear a story on NPR's Morning Edition that references a study just published in The Lancet, will my community, my state, my library community get me a copy of that article if I want it? And how do I go about doing that? If I'm listening to something about climate change and I have questions and I want to track down the latest good research on that information, can I get ahead of that? What kinds of structures do we have in place? So if there's a way to note that question in the bill, or at least as an understanding among the task force members, I think that's worth asking. The final two observations revolve around Mr. Anderson's observation that some of the lines say that the committee may do such and such, and others of them say that they shall do such and such. There were two mays that I wonder if it would be worth making shalls. And those two are, it says the committee may include an assessment of how libraries may best share resources across differing libraries. It seems to me that that's a really important question, and it might be worth requiring the committee to ask that question rather than leaving it up to the committee. Just a thought. The other is it says that the committee may examine models for library management and organization in other states. There is a lot of really interesting stuff happening in other states, fascinating, disparate, wildly divergent models in other states for how libraries cooperate and work together. And whatever solutions this committee ends up recommending, I think it would really behoove the committee to acquaint itself with the various things happening in other states. If only to reject parts of them, I think the ultimate recommendations would be stronger for having considered them. So those are my thoughts.
Very, very helpful. Thank you, Professor. Questions for Professor Geffert or for any others? Senator Hooker.
Just a quick one. When did Bailey Howe become Howe? And
Yeah, just before my arrival, which was about 2 years ago. So I was not part of that. It was a controversy over the fact that Bailey was a fairly well-known and active eugenicist, and the university decided to remove his name.
thank you.
Thank you. One question, I'm not sure who best to pose it to, but this committee has been and will continue to look at civic education. We're going to be returning to this topic on the 23rd when our Agency of Education is coming back with an overall assessment of how K through 12 experiences civics, learns civics, and perhaps some advice on how the legislature can be helpful. The other topic that will be of interest to all of you is literacy. We have, no matter how you cut it, looking at scores, they're not great when students reach third grade. We're trying to make improvements in that regard. Tell me how you all are working on those two issues, or how you might be partners on those. Mr. Broughton.
Thank you, Chair. I can definitely answer that. Know that this was a unique question from a counterpart of yours in a budget hearing that I had prior to this meeting from Senator Kitchell regarding, because we were discussing one of the nuances in our budget where this year, for the first time ever, I would hope that all of you have heard of the summer reading program at your local library that is done every year. It's usually done in print. Once COVID hit, we made the quick decision to do some interesting things. We took some of our federal money and we bought a subscription to what is known as Beanstack. So summer reading went virtual for the first time ever in Vermont. And what that will allow over time is the study of data without giving out confidential information. You can assess reading levels primarily for leisure reading during the summer at a certain level, which will allow you to kind of cross-reference, if we wanted to, with the Agency of Education. What are children doing over the summer when it comes to reading? Are we helping to diminish the summer slide, as they like to call it? Along with this subscription allows us to have reading challenges any time of the year. It doesn't have to be summer reading only. We have launched a winter reading program. And so our goal is to work a little bit closer with the Agency of Education on the role of literacy at all levels, including adults, which will come in time. But our biggest goal is going to be children and youth. And so that is one of our aspects from a literary side to kind of standardize. And also, we are working with AOE when they immediately went virtual and with connections to Vermont Public Radio and also PBS. We were afforded opportunities to go to training. So our libraries are also training with the educators. There's always been an interesting request from libraries across the country of almost any caliber to understand the local school. And what that means is the librarians in this state have slowly come, some of them are already doing it, but a lot more have asked us, but we're kind of interested to know what is the curricula? How can we kind of help with that in all levels? So we are working with them. Primarily it's in Jeanette's area, and she can afford a little bit more information if she would like to on this, on what we're doing to kind of connect more with education and help the library understand some of the needs that might be addressed if they can address them based on curricula, topic, and subject. So it's going to be, in some cases, school librarians working with the public librarian, and in other cases, school librarians, the teacher, and the public library. And I think we have two cases in the state where we actually have a school librarian, a public library, and an academic library, which to me is a crown jewel, all working together to show a pathway of why a library is important in your life, cradle to grave. Because right now we're probably all using the public library as our secondary. But if you're going to go to college, you need to access a college library. I can tell you, I didn't learn a college library system until I got to the front desk and I said, I have a paper due tomorrow. And she says, sit down, stop crying, we'll help you out. So I didn't know how to work that. No one does till you get to college. So I think showing progression will assist the department in showing how can we have a more literate system of people who are educated and democratized. But that is a dream, and I'm open to having as many stakeholders assist us in that effort, because we see that we don't talk as much as we would like with the academic community. We do provide services, but we could certainly, in a sense, examine what we could do more.
The other thing, I don't know if Senator Kitchell mentioned this to you, but we've been talking also about just, and you touched on this a little bit, but opportunities this summer and making certain that as much as we possibly can make, perhaps if we can make as many of these programs free through CARES money. So programs that are offered at libraries and other groups, hopefully will have, you know, robust attendance. And I would just
I can add one more then when you said that. Jeanette, do you want to talk about the wonderful thing we did with a portion of our federal and our CARES Act money regarding movie licenses? This will come as a surprise to you, because we offer this to public libraries, but we did so because what happened to school under COVID.
Sure, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Of course, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so thanks to the CARES funding, we were able to buy movie licenses available to every school in the state that allowed the teachers there to assign streaming movies to students to watch at home, to help them with a flipped classroom model where maybe they could watch a movie before they had a lesson on that movie, or they could have the lesson first and then go home and watch the movie as well. And this was a real improvement for the schools and the options that they had with options with assigning some of the tasks to the students at home and using their in-person time, which of course was limited at the beginning of COVID, to really working through their lesson plans and the lessons. So that was a great thing we were able to add thanks to CARES for the schools. We do make these movies available, not streaming, but in library viewing to public libraries as well. And they were able to show movies out on their property outside this summer and move some of their programming out and really enhance their services and what they were offering in their communities. The other thing, speaking of literacy, that Jason hadn't mentioned is our book awards. So we offer 3 book awards across all age ranges. So we start with picture books and go all the way up to teen book awards, and they're reader choice awards. So the students, we have committees make a selection, nominate books, and the students then pick their top choices, and we have those across all ages. And these really engage students. They are excited about reading. There's a little bit of a peer pressure element going on where they all compete each other to read every single book that was nominated. And we hear from the students anecdotally that the book awards are the things that really get them excited. Even young males who tend to not be big readers are challenged in these book award seasons that we offer. So that's another thing I wanted to add.
Well, I would like to just add what they are. So you have the Red Clover, followed by the new item, which for some was controversial because we renamed the Dorothy Canfield Fisher Award, which is now called the Vermont Golden Dome Award, voted on by the children of Vermont. I will say up front, I was very terrified of letting the children vote, because when you turn it over to kids, we could have got Bodie McBoatface. Didn't know what was going to happen, but we trusted the children and they came through remarkably. Our last one is the Green Mountain Book Award, which is for the youth.
This has been an incredible conversation. Libraries are so important. All of you are incredibly important to all of us and the children and adults in our state. So thank you for everything that you're doing. We look forward to continuing this partnership as we, again, look to increasing literacy, civic education, just again, being a wonderful resource for communities, being a safe space. So thank you. Any other final committee questions or comments? Senator Perschlick.
Yeah, just thank you for the work. And if anybody doesn't know about Bodie McBoatface, they should go to their local library and look it up because it's a great story.
Good. That's great. Yeah, no, that's terrific. Okay. Thank you all.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you, Mr. Anderson. Committee. Let's see. Does anyone, and I'm looking to Senator Perchlik in particular, as having been here for this bill in the past, anybody see any concerns, red flags, any reason people not interested in advancing this? Anybody want to kill it? No. Okay, good. Got Senator Chittenden.
I don't want to kill it, but I just want to say, no, I love libraries. And I think this is well worth moving forward. And the fact that it went through last year, but COVID paused it, gives me reason to say, let's charge forward.
Yeah. Senator Perchlik.
I was just going to, for committee interest, I didn't know that the committee had anything to do with libraries when I got on it. And Philip Ruth pointed out, and I noticed at the time that each committee has a jurisdiction sentence at the big top. If you go to each committee's website, which I had never noticed before. And in our jurisdictions, libraries and scientific stuff, there's something else in there. And that's what generated the idea with Senator Hardy. She's like, oh, I didn't know we could do stuff with libraries. And then she took off from there. But just if you're ever wondering what jurisdiction each committee has, you can always look at that little sentence there.
That's great. I'm not sure if I have ever looked at that sentence. So that's terrific.
We can do
okay.
scientific studies too.
Right. So what I would ask senators to do is think about this tonight. Is there anybody else that you would like to hear from? This is certainly important to Senator Hardy. I think we all agree it's a great step. And if we want to hear from anybody else, can certainly hear from additional people. I think there are a couple of comments that Jim will I'll point out to Jim to see if we want to make any edits. And if anybody else has any edits or suggestions, during our next discussion about the bill, please feel free to bring them up. But I'm not anticipating any controversy. Senator Lyons.
Yes, just your initial comments before we looked at the bill included the idea that this could be added to a miscellaneous education bill. So we probably should consider that. I don't know what else would be in a miscellaneous bill, but I mean, this one to me feels like it's very important to the libraries of the state, but I think it's also important to us. So we should decide.
Yeah, I'm completely, completely open to those kinds of things, whatever direction senators want to go in. I did ask, and it may not fit. In other words, I've asked Secretary French to come in next, I believe Wednesday or Thursday, with his ideas, his needs from the agency with miscellaneous ed. And if it is, as new senators will find, if it is punctuation and getting rid of old statutes, it might not feel right to plop a couple of other things in there. But then again, it might be the way that the committee wants it to go. But I do respect, and I'm sure we all do, we all put in a lot of time and energy into different bills and want to, celebrate that process. So Senator Hooker, please.
I just would like some clarification on the parts that came from the House and, whether or not we're going to incorporate them in this bill, and which of them we need to incorporate, which are going to be, left out.
Okay, sure. Okay. Terrific. Any other final questions or comments? It looks like, I don't know what it's like in the center or northern part of the state, but the sun is just amazing. The days are getting longer. I know, so hopefully everybody can can get out, enjoy yourselves, families, etc. Anything else? Senator Chittenden.
I don't want to keep us long, but I was intrigued by a comment Bruce Post made about their role in the library organization when they get to name geographic places. It's been raised multiple times that Vermont could do better at honoring our Indigenous people naming conventions and spaces. I don't know if that falls within the Education Committee's domain, but it's certainly something that's piqued my interest.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Senator Hooker, please.
Well, and Senator Lyons can speak to this because we did it last year in institutions. They also, I believe, used to have jurisdiction over naming buildings, but or no. Am I getting confused, Senator Lyons? Oh, Mr. Post is here, and he can clarify.
I think Senator Lyons might want to say something first. Go ahead, Senator.
Yeah, no. Wait, sorry. It wasn't buildings. It was roads. But we did have. I'm trying to remember what we had a request for a pond or a lake recently that the board of maybe Bruce Post can tell us which one it was.
Well, first of all, we don't have a mandate to consider indigenous names, but we have. We've named 2 sites with Abenaki names: Muskashkik Brook, which means red spruce, up in Plainfield, and we did Sokoke Falls near Rockingham, and Sokoke was the eastern band of the Abenaki. One of the issues we have before us now is whether Negro Brook in Townsend should be changed. We have an active petition before us, and we've taken some testimony. We couldn't complete the testimony. We decided in conjunction with the petitioners at our January meeting to put off any consideration of having a special meeting until our next meeting in April. So it's raised a number of issues. Actually, I won't go into all of them here, but I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot. And somebody asked about the most unusual library. Let me just maybe send you away laughing, hopefully. I was on the select board of Essex, and when I was on the select board, our librarian at the Essex Free Library came with a request for a toilet seat. And I asked her, a toilet seat? And, they say libraries do everything, but a lot of different things. We're at the intersection of Vermont Highway 15 and 128, so there's a lot of traffic. She said a lot of UPS drivers and vendors use the bathroom a lot. The board wasn't sure whether he wanted to fund a toilet seat. I went home, told my son, he says, I'll buy it for him. But they ended up with a brand new toilet, water efficient, and I don't think it's being used right now. But that was the most unusual request I ever remember.
Very interesting indeed. Okay. Thank you all. Senator Perschlick, did you have
Well, I thought just on the Abenaki names, the institutions, what they did last year was encourage, the way I remember, Forest and Parks to include Abenaki names alongside maybe the current.
Right. On signage, yeah, exactly.
so a translation of the name.
To have both names up.
It's not a translation.
Yes.
They're not.
No, it's not, but
No, it would be the Abenaki name.
English name and the Abenaki name, or it could be a French name and
Okay. Okay. Great. Okay. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Have a good